A thriving civilization vanished in a single night. The Minoans of ancient Crete saw their world shattered by the volcanic eruption of Thera, a disaster that echoes through history. Yet around the same time, other societies faced the Earth's raw power and not only endured but built empires. How did ancient engineers outsmart the Earth's fury without any of our modern technology? You are about to discover the forgotten secrets of seismic-resistant temples and flood-defying cities, knowledge that could redefine our own approach to survival. How did builders with only stone and timber create structures that have lasted millennia, while our own sometimes fail in decades? What does it truly mean to build for the future? For these ancient societies, the ground itself could turn traitor without warning. A deep, guttural roar might be the only signal before the world shook violently, toppling homes and crushing entire families. Rivers could swell into monstrous walls of water, wiping villages from the map in an instant. The sky might darken for years after a distant volcano erupted, choking crops and bringing famine. This was not a world of abstract risks but a daily reality where survival depended on appeasing unseen forces and outthinking the elements. The psychological weight was immense, fostering a deep, reverent fear of the natural world. This fear, however, did not lead to paralysis. It became the ultimate catalyst for innovation. Confronted with an unpredictable and often hostile planet, the first engineers had to look past mere shelter. They needed to build defiance into the very foundations of their cities. Their greatest creations were not just monuments to gods or kings, but intricate dialogues with the earth itself, a desperate and brilliant attempt to negotiate for a future. Their limited toolkit of stone, timber, and earth was not a disadvantage but a constraint that sparked unparalleled creativity. What they achieved with so little stands as a profound question for our own time. Their greatest insights did not come from complex calculations but from patient, silent observation of the world around them. Ancient engineers watched how a willow tree swayed violently in a storm without snapping, its slender trunk and branches absorbing the wind's energy. They saw how reeds in a riverbed did not fight the floodwaters but yielded, bending almost to the point of breaking before springing back upright when the surge passed. This was the first and most crucial principle, a quiet dialogue with nature where humanity was the student. They learned that flexibility, not brute strength, was the key to enduring the Earth's unpredictable tantrums. This practice of mimicking nature's designs, what we now call biomimicry, became the bedrock of their engineering philosophy. It was a profound act of humility, admitting that the best solutions already existed in the living world. One of the most elegant examples comes from ancient China, where builders faced frequent and devastating earthquakes. They looked to the bamboo plant, a natural marvel of engineering. A single stalk of bamboo is relatively weak, but a dense grove with its interconnected, hollow segments can withstand gale-force winds. The Chinese applied this principle to their iconic pagodas. Instead of constructing them as single, massive towers of stone, they built them with multiple, distinct tiers. Each tier was supported by a complex wooden skeleton, using intricate joinery that allowed the floors to shift and sway independently, much like the segments of a bamboo stalk. This design created a dynamic structure that could dance with an earthquake, dissipating the destructive energy throughout its frame rather than resisting it until it shattered. This was not a sudden invention but an evolution, from passive observation to active, brilliant application. It marks the moment our ancestors stopped seeing themselves as separate from nature and started learning its language, a lesson in wisdom that directly translated into survival. The principle of flexibility was a masterclass in dancing with the Earth's movements, but it was only half the battle. An even more fundamental form of genius lay in knowing precisely where to stand. The single most critical decision an ancient engineer could make was not how to build, but where. This was not a matter of finding flat ground or a scenic view. It was an act of profound geological and hydrological intelligence, a deep reading of the landscape to find the one spot that offered a natural truce with the planet's fury. Consider the Nabateans, the desert traders who carved the breathtaking city of Petra directly into the rose-red cliffs of Jordan. To the casual observer, a narrow, winding canyon known as the Siq might seem like a death trap, vulnerable to rockfalls and flash floods. But the Nabateans saw what others missed. They understood the canyon's geology intimately. By building within the solid rock itself, their structures were inherently shielded from the direct shock of earthquakes. More impressively, they mastered the water. They constructed an intricate system of dams and channels to divert seasonal floodwaters away from their city, turning a lethal threat into a managed resource. They did not fight the canyon's nature, they partnered with it. This wisdom echoed across the globe. In Mesoamerica, the Maya often built their grand ceremonial centers like Palenque on elevated limestone ridges. This high ground provided natural drainage during torrential rains, preventing catastrophic erosion and flooding that would have plagued lower-lying settlements. In Mesopotamia, where flat plains offered little natural protection, city planners deliberately built on massive artificial mounds called tells. These raised platforms lifted the heart of the city above the unpredictable floodwaters of the Tigris and Euphrates rivers. What these cultures were practicing centuries before the term existed was a form of early environmental impact assessment. They were reading the land for its hidden stresses and its silent strengths. They sought out stable bedrock that would not liquefy during a quake. They avoided obvious fault lines. They positioned their communities above the floodplain. This was the ultimate proactive strategy. It highlights a stark truth that resonates today. The smartest engineering solution is not always a more complex defense. Sometimes it is the profound wisdom of simply not being in the path of danger in the first place, but choosing the right location was just the beginning. Once the site was secured, the real magic happened in the very first layer of construction, a secret hidden beneath the foundations. An earthquake's terror lies in its invisibility, a silent violence that travels through the ground to strike without mercy. Against this unseen foe, ancient engineers developed a brilliant counter-strategy. They designed their structures not to stand rigid and defiant, but to move, to sway, to absorb the shock. This was the art of letting a building dance with the quake. The concept is deceptively simple. A rigid structure fights the energy of a seismic wave, and in that fight, it will inevitably lose, cracking and collapsing under the stress. A flexible structure, however, yields. It rides the wave, allowing the destructive energy to pass through and dissipate harmlessly. This revolutionary idea, which we now call base isolation in modern engineering, was being perfected thousands of years ago. The evidence is etched into the ruins of empires. Look at the master stonemasons of the Inca civilization. Their monumental walls, assembled from polygonal stones cut with impossible precision, fit together without any mortar. It seems like a quest for perfect, unmoving stability, but the real genius is in the imperfections. The way these massive, irregular blocks interlock actually creates a structure that can shift and settle during a tremor. The walls move as a single, flexible unit, the stones grinding against each other just enough to absorb the earthquake's energy before settling back into place, often without a single stone falling. It is as if the Incas performed endless shaking table tests through centuries of observation and refinement. On the other side of the world, in China and Japan, this philosophy reached its zenith in wood. Elaborate systems of interlocking wooden brackets known as dugong in China were used to support the heavy, tiled roofs of temples and palaces. These brackets were not nailed or glued. They were a complex puzzle of wooden pieces fitted together with such skill that they formed a joint that could flex and compress. During an earthquake, the entire roof structure could sway independently from the supporting pillars, a graceful, calculated dance that saved countless buildings from destruction. This overview reveals a holistic grasp of physics that seems to defy their era. They understood that to survive the Earth's fury, you must speak its language of motion. But how did they achieve such flexibility with stone and timber? The answers lie in the specific, breathtaking technologies hidden within these ancient walls. High in the Andes, where the earth trembles with a terrifying frequency, the Incas built for eternity. Their cities, like Machu Picchu, cling to mountain ridges not as fragile intruders but as extensions of the bedrock itself. This defiance of seismic chaos was achieved with a technique of breathtaking simplicity and sophistication, ashlar polygonal masonry. Imagine a master puzzle, but one where the pieces are giant blocks of granite, each weighing several tons, and no two pieces are the same shape. The Inca stonemasons did not use uniform bricks. They painstakingly carved irregular, multifaceted stones that fit against their neighbors with such precision that you cannot slip a razor blade between them. No mortar was used, no cement. The structure's strength came entirely from the genius of its geometry. This was a dry stone method that created a living, breathing wall. When the ground remained still, the walls stood with the solid, imposing presence of a natural cliff face. But when an earthquake's waves traveled through the mountain, the rigid, monolithic wall was an illusion. The true magic revealed itself. Each stone, locked in by its neighbors, was free to shift minutely, to tremble and settle. The energy of the quake was not concentrated into a few weak points. Instead, it was dissipated throughout the entire structure as the stones danced together in a unified, shock-absorbing motion. Once the shaking stopped, gravity and the perfect interlocking shapes would simply guide the stones back into their original positions. To see this principle in its most awe-inspiring form, one must look beyond Machu Picchu to the fortress of Sacsayhuaman, which overlooks the city of Cusco. Here, the stones are not just large, they are colossal, some weighing over 100 tons. The walls curve and zigzag, and the polygonal blocks fit together with a complexity that seems to defy logic. These are not just walls, they are geological tapestries woven directly into the mountain. During a seismic event, such a wall does not act as a single, brittle entity. It behaves more like a flexible chain mail, distributing force across its entire surface. Another brilliant example is the temple complex at Ollantaytambo. The retaining walls here have faced countless quakes and landslides, yet they stand perfectly true. The stones are locked together with such intricate cuts that they create a cohesive mass far stronger than the sum of its parts. This was not crude construction. It was a profound understanding of physics, achieved through centuries of observation and refinement. The Incas learned that to survive the mountain's rage, you did not build a fortress against it. You built a partner that could move with it. This ancient dance between stone and earth raises a compelling question. If the Incas mastered flexibility with rock, what secrets did other cultures unlock with a more pliable material? The answer lies in the forests of the East, where engineers built with wood to achieve a different kind of seismic grace. While the Incas tamed stone to move with the earth, Japanese builders turned to the forest to achieve the same goal. In a nation defined by its tremors, they perfected a structure that seems to defy physics, the multi-storied wooden pagoda. These towers, some standing for over a millennium, embody a philosophy of resilience that is both elegant and profound. Their secret lies not in rigid resistance, but in a brilliant component known as the Shinbashira. Imagine a massive central pillar, a giant tree trunk, running straight up through the heart of the pagoda. But here is the masterstroke. This central pillar does not support the building from below. Instead, it hangs suspended from the very top, a colossal pendulum dangling within the hollow core of the tower, its base hovering just above the ground. This is the heart of the system. When the earth remains still, the pagoda stands as a monument to quiet strength. But when an earthquake strikes, the building comes alive. The individual floors, constructed with flexible wooden joints, are designed to sway independently. They do not move in unison like a rigid block. Instead, they slide and shift against each other, a motion that would normally tear a structure apart. This is where the Shinbashira performs its magic. As the floors sway, the heavy hanging pillar begins to swing in the opposite direction. It acts as a massive counterweight, a stabilizing force that dampens the wilder oscillations. The energy of the quake is not fought, but absorbed and neutralized by the rhythmic, opposing movement of the pillar and the floors. It is a dance of perfect counterbalance, a passive damping system of genius simplicity. This is why pagodas have survived centuries of violent tremors that have flattened modern concrete buildings. The builders understood that fighting force with force was a losing battle. They chose instead to build a partner for the earthquake, a structure that could sway gracefully and then return to center unharmed. This ancient insight into controlling vibration is a principle that modern skyscraper engineering has only recently readopted with tuned mass dampers. The Shinbashira stands as a timeless testament to the power of working with natural forces, not against them. But flexibility and strategic placement were only part of the ancient engineer's toolkit. Some of their most cunning innovations were designed not to move, but to deceive the very water that threatened to erase them. The silent, shifting dance of a Japanese pagoda finds a powerful echo in the ruins of a much older civilization. Long before the Incas cut their stone or the Japanese hung their pillars, the Minoan engineers of Crete were confronting the same violent earth. Their sprawling palace complexes, like the legendary Knossos, were not just administrative centers. They were masterclasses in seismic survival, built with a cleverness that still astonishes archaeologists today. At the very base of their massive stone walls, hidden from view, lies one of their most ingenious secrets. The Minoans did not build their foundations from solid stone alone. Instead, they created a layered sandwich, alternating courses of stone rubble with horizontal beams of timber. These timber layers, known as string courses, were the Bronze Age equivalent of modern shock absorbers. When the ground began to shake, the rigid stonework above wanted to crack and fall. But the wooden beams below provided a flexible cushion. They allowed the heavy walls to slide and shift ever so slightly as a single unit, dissipating the earthquake's energy horizontally across the foundation. This prevented the focused, catastrophic stress that would otherwise cause a total collapse. It was a way of letting the building skate on the tremor rather than be broken by it. The evidence for this is etched into the archaeological record. Excavations at Knossos and other Minoan sites reveal the distinct crisscross pattern of these timber beams, their impressions still visible in the stone millennia after the wood itself rotted away. This was not a localized trick. The same principle was adopted and adapted by the Mycenaeans on the Greek mainland, whose formidable citadels like Mycenae and Tiryns also incorporated similar flexible foundations. This shared technological language across the Aegean suggests a hard-won, collective wisdom passed between these Bronze Age powers. They understood that the key to longevity was not immovable strength, but controlled, graceful movement. A rigid fortress would be a tomb. A flexible one could live to see another day. Yet for all their brilliance in outsmarting the shaking earth, ancient engineers faced an equally formidable opponent, one that could arrive as a silent, creeping rise or a devastating wall of water. The Earth's tremors demanded a dance of flexibility, but a volcanic eruption presented a far more brutal and multi-headed monster. For civilizations living in the shadow of fiery mountains, survival meant confronting an assault that rained from the sky and flowed across the land. They witnessed the terrifying spectacle of incandescent lava consuming everything in its path, the suffocating clouds of superheated gas and rock known as pyroclastic surges, and the silent, insidious danger of ashfall that could collapse roofs and poison the air for miles. This was not a force you could sway with or absorb. It was a force you had to divert, outlast, or desperately outrun. The engineering challenges shifted from dynamic absorption to a grim, pragmatic form of triage. On the fertile slopes of Mount Vesuvius in Italy, Roman towns like Pompeii and Herculaneum thrived, their inhabitants well aware of the mountain's past fury. While they could not have predicted the cataclysm of 79 AD, their building techniques reveal a society adapted to lesser, more frequent volcanic threats. They constructed robust, sloped roofs designed to shed the weight of accumulated ash, preventing structural failure during smaller eruptions. More remarkably, there is evidence they attempted to manage the land itself. They built terraced walls and channels not just for agriculture, but to redirect minor mudflows and lahars, those deadly rivers of volcanic debris and water that can follow an eruption. This was not about stopping the volcano's power, but about steering its lesser consequences away from vital areas. Across the world, in the volcanic highlands of Central America, indigenous engineers displayed even more direct intervention. There are accounts, supported by geological evidence and local oral histories, of communities constructing primitive but effective stone barriers and diversion channels to influence the path of slow-moving lava flows. These were not massive dams meant to hold back the tide. Instead, they were strategically placed obstructions, built with an intimate knowledge of the local topography. By guiding the lava into less destructive paths, perhaps into an uninhabited valley or a prepared channel, these ancient engineers performed a high-stakes negotiation with the inferno. They understood the lava's relentless nature and chose not to fight it head-on, but to give it a new, less catastrophic direction. This required a deep understanding of hydraulics and material behavior, applied on a terrifyingly grand scale. It was a starkly different kind of foresight, one that accepted the inevitable and focused all human ingenuity on minimizing the damage. The goal was not to win, but to survive with something left to rebuild. While lava and ash presented one kind of threat, the aftermath of an eruption posed a more insidious challenge: the poisoning of a civilization's lifeblood, its water. Here, the Romans demonstrated an engineering foresight that went far beyond mere monuments. Their sprawling aqueducts, marvels of hydraulic precision, often had to cross landscapes still trembling from volcanic activity. A constant, clean water supply was non-negotiable for their cities, and they refused to let the Earth's fury interrupt it. The solution was a masterclass in anticipating failure. Roman engineers understood that a rigid stone channel, no matter how perfectly graded, would crack and split if the ground beneath it shifted. So, within those stone conduits, they often installed a hidden secret, flexible piping made of sheet lead. This brilliant redundancy allowed the system to absorb minor ground settlements and tremors without a catastrophic rupture. the lead pipes could bend and give, maintaining the vital water flow even as the solid stone shell around them settled. But their genius was even more proactive. Before a single stone was laid, Roman surveyors, using simple but incredibly effective tools like the chorobates, a precise leveling instrument, would map the route with an eye toward geological stability. They deliberately routed their aqueducts along the spines of stable ridges, carefully avoiding the unstable, ash-rich slopes and valleys most vulnerable to landslides or future lava flows from volcanoes like Mount Etna in Sicily. This was not just about finding the shortest path, it was about finding the safest one. This case study reveals a profound shift in thinking. The Romans were not just building defenses. They were building intelligent systems designed to endure, proving that their true prowess lay in resilient, practical risk management woven into the very fabric of their empire. The silence before the storm is perhaps the most terrifying part of any disaster. For the Minoan civilization on Crete, the decades leading up to the cataclysm of Thera may have been filled with such ominous whispers. Archaeological excavations at their great palaces like Knossos and Phaistos reveal a startling pattern. The grand ceremonial centers and wealthy residential districts show few signs of a sudden, violent end from the eruption itself. There are no massive layers of volcanic ash directly sealing the streets, no skeletons crushed by collapsing roofs under the weight of pumice. Instead, the evidence points to a gradual, deliberate departure. Valuable artifacts, including religious items and portable wealth, appear to have been removed. The grand palaces were not destroyed in a fiery cataclysm, they were simply left behind. This suggests a population that did not flee in a single, panicked night, but one that may have departed in an organized, phased withdrawal. So what did they know, and when did they know it? Volcanic eruptions are rarely spontaneous explosions. They are typically preceded by a chorus of geological warnings. Thera itself would have been groaning for years, perhaps even decades. The Minoans, with their advanced seafaring culture, maintained close contact with the island of Thera, which hosted a significant Minoan-style settlement at Akrotiri. They would have been the first to witness the early signs. The ground on Thera would have begun to shudder with frequent, sharp earthquakes as magma forced its way upward. Fissures might have opened, venting strange, sulfurous gases that poisoned the air and water. The sea around the island could have grown warmer, its level subtly changing as the volcano's cone bulged from below. For a society deeply attuned to natural omens, these phenomena would not have been mere curiosities. They would have been a dire prophecy written in the language of the earth itself. The Minoan priesthood, likely responsible for interpreting the will of the gods, may have seen these events not as random occurrences, but as a clear and escalating sequence. This interpretation transforms from a theory of lucky guesswork into one of sophisticated, observation-based forecasting. Could this knowledge have triggered a managed exodus? The logistical feat of moving a significant portion of a civilization's population from coastal Crete to safer regions, perhaps to the interior of the island or even to other lands in the Aegean, would have been monumental. It would have required a central authority with the power to coordinate and the credibility to be believed. The intact state of the palaces, devoid of looted treasures, suggests this authority remained in control until the end. They were not overrun by chaos, they were executing a plan. This paints a picture of a society that chose collective survival over defending fixed locations. They may have calculated that their brilliant seismic-resistant architecture, designed for earthquakes, would be useless against the tsunamis and ash fall that were coming. Their greatest engineering achievement in this scenario was not a building but an evacuation. It was the ultimate application of their core philosophy, to work with the forces of nature, even when that meant yielding the ground entirely. Yet a counterargument persists. Some scholars point to evidence of significant fire damage at some Minoan sites that predates the Thera eruption. This could indicate a period of internal warfare or rebellion that weakened the civilization, making it vulnerable. In this view, the abandonment of the palaces was not a strategic retreat from a volcanic threat, but a societal collapse from within. The Minoans may have been a dying culture when Thera dealt its final blow. The truth likely lies somewhere in between. The geological warnings from Thera probably coincided with a period of social and political stress for the Minoans. The foresight of their leaders would have been tested not just by interpreting the volcano's signs, but by maintaining order and purpose amidst growing fear. Whether they fully understood the scale of the coming destruction remains one of history's great mysteries. Their story stands as a haunting testament to the dilemma of foresight, knowing a disaster is coming and wrestling with the impossible choices of how to respond. For societies born along the fertile banks of great rivers, water was a capricious god. It gave life with one hand and took it away with the other. A predictable annual flood brought nutrient-rich silt that guaranteed a bountiful harvest. But a flood that arrived too early, too late, or with unprecedented force could erase generations of work in days. Ancient engineers recognized that they could not simply wall themselves off from this essential, dangerous force. Their monumental achievement was to shift from a defensive crouch to a posture of masterful cooperation. They learned to negotiate with the water, creating systems that did not just resist floods, but invited them in, tamed their energy, and put them to work. This was the birth of hydraulic engineering on a grand scale, a global revolution that turned volatile rivers into the disciplined engines of civilization. The most iconic example rises from the deserts of Mesopotamia. In the land between the Tigris and Euphrates, the Sumerians faced an environment of extreme contrasts, scorching drought followed by unpredictable, violent inundations. Their response was not to build higher walls, but to dig. They constructed vast, intricate networks of canals that stretched for hundreds of miles across the flat plain. These canals were a work of breathtaking ambition. They served a dual, brilliant purpose. During a flood, they acted as a release valve, siphoning off the excess water from the main river channels and distributing it across the landscape, preventing a single catastrophic breach. But once the immediate danger passed, the same canals became a permanent irrigation system, carrying life-giving water to fields far from the river's edge throughout the growing season. This was a system designed for perpetual function for both crisis and calm. The Sumerians did not see the flood as an enemy to be defeated. They saw it as a vast, seasonal reservoir that needed to be carefully managed and stored. Their genius lay in creating a symbiotic relationship where the river's destructive power was directly converted into agricultural prosperity. This philosophy of intelligent water management was not confined to one region. In the Indus Valley, the cities of the Harappan civilization, like Mohenjo-Daro, were marvels of urban hydraulics. Every house seems to have been connected to a city-wide drainage system, with covered channels and settling tanks to manage both wastewater and storm surges. Their entire urban plan was an exercise in flood resilience, with major streets laid out on a grid to efficiently channel water and raised citadels providing refuge. They were not just building cities, they were building ecosystems designed to live in harmony with the monsoon. Even in the Americas, the Maya in the seasonal tropics constructed complex systems of reservoirs and canals to store water from the rainy season to survive the long dry months, turning a climate of feast and famine into one of sustained abundance. What unites these disparate cultures is a fundamental insight. The most profound engineering is not about domination. It is about invitation and conversion, about building a conversation with the natural world where both parties benefit. The river gives its water and silt, the civilization gives its labor and intelligence. The result is a partnership that can last for millennia. This urban resilience was engineered right down to the street level. In the meticulously planned cities of the Indus Valley, like Mohenjo-Daro and Harappa, the true marvel was not what rose above the ground, but what flowed beneath it. While contemporaries were building pyramids and ziggurats, the Harappans were investing their collective genius into something far less glamorous but infinitely more vital: the world's first comprehensive urban sanitation network. Their achievement reveals a society whose core value was not monumental grandeur, but the practical, dignified health of every single citizen. Imagine a city from over 4,000 years ago where nearly every single house, from the largest courtyard residence to the more modest dwelling, contained its own dedicated bathroom. This space was not a simple pit. It was a carefully constructed room with a brick floor that sloped gently toward a corner drain. From that drain, a terracotta pipe would connect to a hidden world below the streets. The Harappans built an entire subterranean infrastructure of covered, brick-lined sewers. These were not open gutters. They were engineered channels large enough for a person to crawl through for maintenance, and they were systematically buried beneath the main avenues and alleyways. The brilliance was in the gradient. The builders laid these sewers with a precise, consistent slope, ensuring that water and waste would flow naturally away from the residential areas, driven by gravity alone. This was not a haphazard system. It was a city-wide hydraulic machine. At regular intervals, brick manholes provided access points for cleaning and clearing blockages, a clear indication that this was a system designed for long-term operation, not just initial construction. This network did more than just manage household waste. It was the city's primary defense against the intense seasonal monsoons. During heavy rains, the same channels that carried wastewater would efficiently drain stormwater from the streets, preventing the catastrophic flooding that could cripple a less prepared settlement. By separating wastewater from drinking water sources and managing runoff, the Harappans achieved a level of public health that would not be seen again in urban centers for thousands of years. This was engineering in the service of society itself, a profound understanding that a civilization's strength is built not on its tallest temples, but on the health of its people. It stands as a timeless lesson in what it truly means to build for the future. The mastery of water in Mesopotamia was a testament to human ambition on an almost unimaginable scale. Sumerian engineers looked at the flat, unforgiving plain between the Tigris and Euphrates and saw not a barrier but a blank slate for a hydraulic empire. Their greatest creations were not towering ziggurats alone, but the thousands of miles of canals they etched into the earth. This was an irrigation revolution that transformed a landscape of extremes into the Fertile Crescent. The scale of these networks was staggering, with main channels wide enough for boats to pass, branching into smaller arteries that fed water directly into fields of barley and wheat. But this was far more than just a delivery system for water. It was a dynamic tool for flood control. When the snows melted in the distant mountains, the rivers would swell, threatening to overflow their banks. The canal network acted as a massive pressure release valve, deliberately drawing off the excess water and spreading it across cultivated land, preventing a single catastrophic breach. This required a deep understanding of topography and flow, a kind of practical physics perfected through generations of observation. The labor force required was immense, a highly organized society where thousands of workers would have been conscripted to dig and, crucially, to maintain these vital channels against the relentless silt brought by the rivers themselves. This constant maintenance was the true engine of the system, a never-ending conversation with the water, Alongside the canals stood another line of defense, strong earthen levees or dikes built up along the riverbanks. These were not mere piles of dirt. They were engineered embankments compacted and reinforced to contain the seasonal fury. The mathematics involved were sophisticated for their time. Surveyors used simple but effective tools to ensure the canals had the precise, gentle slope needed for water to flow steadily without eroding the channels. This hydraulic mastery did more than just prevent disaster. It created a surplus of food so reliable that it freed people to become artisans, priests, and scribes. The world's first cities could not have flourished without this foundation. It was the ultimate bargain with nature, a deal struck with mud brick and human ingenuity that turned a volatile environment into the cradle of civilization. Yet the Sumerian canals and Harappan drains, for all their brilliance, depended on the constant, visible flow of surface water. In the vast, arid plateaus of ancient Persia, a different kind of miracle was taking shape, one that pulled water from the very bones of the earth. Here, engineers devised a system of such elegant simplicity it seems almost magical, the Qanat. Picture a gently sloping tunnel, dug deep underground, stretching silently for miles from a fertile oasis at the base of a mountain range to a sun-scorched plain. This was not a channel for rainwater, but a man-made aquifer, a secret river coaxed from the depths. The genius began with locating the water table at the foot of a mountain, where groundwater, filtered through miles of rock, collected in pure, abundant reserves. Instead of digging a simple well that would quickly evaporate under the desert sun, Persian engineers began tunneling horizontally, backward into the hillside, following a gradient so slight that water would flow effortlessly by gravity alone. The construction itself was a masterpiece of precision and peril. Teams of workers, known as muqannis, dug a series of vertical shafts down to the desired tunnel depth, sometimes reaching over 100 meters. These shafts served as air vents and provided access for removing excavated material. Then, connecting the bottoms of these shafts, they carved the main tunnel, ensuring its slope was perfectly calibrated. Too steep and the water would flow too fast, eroding the tunnel walls. Too shallow and it would stagnate. The result was a self-regulating system that delivered a constant, cool stream of water directly to the surface, where it could irrigate fields and supply settlements without losing a single drop to evaporation. This underground nature made the Qanat incredibly resilient. Shielded from the sun, it resisted drying up during droughts. Protected by tons of earth above, it was virtually immune to the surface-shattering effects of earthquakes. A Qanat could continue to flow for centuries with minimal maintenance, a silent, enduring lifeline. The social impact was profound. A single Qanat could sustain an entire village, and the knowledge required to build and maintain it made the muqannis a respected, vital class. This technology did not just provide water, it enabled the rise of desert cities and the sprawling Persian gardens that became symbols of paradise. It was a sustainable dialogue with a harsh environment, a testament to the power of working with gravity and geology to create life where none seemed possible. The legend of Yu the Great is more than a simple myth. It is a foundational story of Chinese civilization, a narrative etched into the national psyche about the necessity of cooperating with water. For 13 years, Yu is said to have labored, not by building higher walls to hold back the floodwaters, but by dredging channels and canals to guide the torrents back to the sea. He did not fight the river, he gave it a path of least resistance. This ancient philosophy, OF Chinese letter, OR Chinese letter, meaning to guide and clear, found its ultimate expression centuries later in one of the most brilliant engineering feats in history, the Duzhongyan irrigation system. In the 3rd century before Common Era, the Min River was a brutal and unpredictable force. Each summer, swollen with meltwater from the mountains, it would burst its banks, flooding the fertile Chengdu Plain. Then, in the winter, it would shrink, leaving the fields parched and barren. The governor Lai Bing and his son were tasked with a seemingly impossible mission to tame this capricious giant. Their solution defied conventional wisdom. They rejected the idea of a massive dam, which would have silted up quickly and created a catastrophic single point of failure. Instead, they designed a system that was a conversation with the river itself. The first element was the Yuzui, or fish mouth levee. This was not a barrier, but a precisely shaped division. Built from long, woven bamboo baskets filled with stones, the levee was positioned strategically in the center of the river. It did not stop the flow. It split it, diverting a portion of the water into an inner channel for irrigation while leaving the main stream to continue its course. This was a permanent, a UTOMATIC Chinese letter system. During the wet season, the fish mouth would send 60% of the turbulent flow down the main river, preventing flooding, and 40% into the irrigation network. In the dry season, this ratio would reverse naturally, ensuring the farms always had enough water, but water carries silt, and silt would eventually choke any system. This is where the second genius component came in, the Feishan, or flying sand weir. This was a low, secondary weir placed just past the fish mouth. Its height was calibrated with incredible precision. It was just high enough to allow normal water flow into the irrigation canal, but when floodwaters surged, the excess would crest over the weir and wash back into the main river. Critically, this swirling, overflowing action had a second purpose. It would carry with it the suspended silt that had settled in the canal entrance, literally flying the sand back into the main current to be carried away. It was a self-cleaning mechanism powered entirely by the river's own energy. The final piece was the Beipingku, or precious bottleneck, the narrow entrance to the irrigation canal that was cut directly through a mountain. This constriction acted as a natural check, controlling the volume of water entering the plains and ensuring a steady, manageable flow. For over 2,000 years, this symphony of stone and bamboo has functioned flawlessly. It has endured countless earthquakes and floods because it was designed not as a rigid fortress, but as a flexible, intelligent partner to the river. Duzhongyuan stands today not as a frozen relic, but as a living, working system that still irrigates millions of acres, a timeless testament to the wisdom of yielding to a force in order to master it. While volcanoes and floods captured immediate terror, a slower, more patient enemy threatened to undo civilizations grain by grain. Erosion and siltation were the silent assassins of the ancient world, processes that could choke a thriving port, bury fertile fields under sterile sand, and invisibly undermine the foundations of the greatest cities over decades. Combating this required a different kind of genius, one focused not on sudden defense but on perpetual, gentle stewardship of the land itself. This was environmental engineering in its purest form, a battle against the very air and water that sustained them. The Romans, masters of large-scale infrastructure, recognized that the stability of their empire depended on the stability of its soil. In deforested regions of Italy and North Africa, they observed how rainwater, with nothing to hold it back, would wash the precious topsoil from hillsides straight into the rivers, silting up the harbors that were their economic lifeline. Their solution was both simple and profound. They launched massive reforestation campaigns, planting trees on vulnerable slopes. The network of roots acted as a living net, binding the soil together and dramatically slowing the rate of erosion. This was not a quick fix. It was a generational investment, a clear understanding that protecting the land was synonymous with protecting their power. A world away in the humid climate of Southeast Asia, the Khmer Empire faced a similar challenge on an even grander scale. Their capital, Angkor, was a hydraulic city, a masterpiece of canals, moats, and reservoirs that supported a population of nearly 1 million people. But the monsoon rains that filled their system also carried enormous quantities of silt from the surrounding landscape. If this sediment was allowed to flow freely, it would have quickly clogged every channel, bringing the city's water distribution and agriculture to a halt. The Khmer engineers devised an elegant solution with their massive barrays or reservoirs. These were not just storage tanks for water, they were giant, strategically placed silt traps. As water entered the vast, calm expanse of a barray, its speed would drop dramatically. Without the energy to keep them suspended, the heavy sediment particles would sink to the bottom, allowing clear water to flow into the connecting canals. Regular maintenance then involved dredging the nutrient-rich silt from the barray and spreading it on the fields, effectively recycling the very problem into a solution for soil fertility. This cyclical thinking reveals a holistic grasp of ecology that feels remarkably modern. They were not just building structures on the land, they were building a symbiotic relationship with it, managing the entire watershed as a single, interconnected system. Their success depended on anticipating the slow, relentless work of nature and turning its own mechanisms to their advantage. This long-term perspective, this commitment to sustainable land use, protected their colossal investments for centuries, proving that the most brilliant engineering sometimes means knowing how to do nothing more than help the earth help itself. The true genius of ancient engineering was not just in design, but in the very substances they created. They understood that a building's resilience was woven into the molecular fabric of its walls. This led to centuries of experimentation, transforming common earth into legendary supermaterials. The Egyptians, for instance, moved beyond simple mud brick. In the damp, Nile-saturated environment, they developed sophisticated plasters by carefully mixing gypsum and lime. This created a hard, water-resistant finish that protected their monumental stonework from the river's humid breath, ensuring the vibrant paints on temple walls would endure for millennia. But this was merely a prelude to the material science revolution that would build an empire. The Romans achieved a chemical mastery that remains partially unrivaled even today. Their secret weapon was a seemingly humble powder, volcanic ash known as pozzolana. While modern concrete is based on Portland cement, a formulation that can weaken and crack over decades, especially in seawater, Roman concrete was an entirely different beast. The recipe was deceptively simple. They combined this pozzolana ash with lime and chunks of rock or brick aggregate. When mixed with water, a remarkable chemical reaction occurred. The lime and the silica-rich volcanic ash formed a crystalline bond, a glue of calcium silicate hydrate that was not only incredibly strong but also possessed a unique ability. It could cure and gain strength even when completely submerged. Seawater, the nemesis of modern marine concrete, actually became a partner in the process, interacting with the mixture to form minerals like al-tobamorite that made the concrete even more resilient over centuries. This is why Roman harbors, like the one at Caesarea Maritima, have withstood the constant, corrosive pounding of Mediterranean waves for 2,000 years. The concrete did not just resist decay, it embraced the sea and grew stronger. We are only now, with advanced electron microscopes, beginning to fully decode the nanostructure of this ancient marvel. It was a material designed for eternity, a testament to an empirical science born from relentless observation and a deep desire to leave a mark on the world that the earth itself could not erase. The line between an observatory and a temple was often invisible. For the ancient mind, the movements of the stars were not distant scientific phenomena. They were the visible breath of the gods, a divine script written across the night sky. To read this script was to understand the will of the cosmos itself, and this understanding was the ultimate form of predictive engineering. Before a single stone was laid for a city's walls or its granaries, the first and most critical act was to align human life with the celestial clock. Structures like Stonehenge on the Salisbury Plain or the Great Pyramid of Giza were not merely monuments, they were colossal calendars and prediction machines engineered in stone. The precise alignment of Stonehenge with the summer and winter solstices was not just for ceremony. It marked the turning points of the year with unerring accuracy, signaling the time to plant, the time to harvest, and critically, the time when rivers, governed by distant mountain snowmelt, might soon swell. In Egypt, the annual flooding of the Nile was the heartbeat of the civilization. Its arrival was predictable to within a few days, and its timing was heralded by a specific celestial event, the heliacal rising of the star Sirius just before dawn. The pyramids, with their exact cardinal orientations, may have served as eternal markers for these cosmic cycles, ensuring that the priesthood could forecast the life-giving flood with precision, allowing for the meticulous planning of agriculture across the kingdom. This was engineering on a grand temporal scale, building a society in rhythm with the heavens. The role of the priest was therefore also that of the astronomer and the engineer. They were the keepers of this celestial knowledge, spending generations tracking the slow precession of the stars, watching for omens, a comet streaking across the sky, an eclipse darkening the moon. These were not random events. They were interpreted as potent messages, warnings of displeased deities who might unleash earthquakes or droughts. While we might see superstition, this framework provided a system for risk assessment. A warning from the stars could trigger tangible, life-saving actions, the reinforcement of a levee, the early harvest of crops, or the movement of people to higher ground. This fusion of faith and observation created a powerful incentive for meticulous record-keeping and long-term planning. The desire to appease the gods demanded a deep understanding of natural patterns. In this way, the quest for divine favor directly advanced the science of prediction, turning temples into the world's first data centers, where the goal was to outsmart disaster by foreseeing it. The pharaoh's lighthouse did not merely pierce the sky, it defied the very sea that lapped at its foundation. For nearly 1,500 years, this colossal structure guided ships into the bustling port of Alexandria, a testament to engineering that mastered two opposing forces, the relentless corrosion of saltwater and the sudden violence of earthquakes. Its survival was no accident. It was a calculated fusion of principles we have seen across the ancient world, perfected in a single, breathtaking monument. The foundation itself was a stroke of genius built upon the submerged island of Pharos. To create a stable base in the shifting seabed, engineers first constructed a massive, artificial platform. They lowered enormous stone blocks into the water, creating a sturdy breakwater that also served as the lighthouse's footing. This isolated the structure from the worst of the ocean's direct shock, much like choosing a stable ridge for a city. But the real innovation was in the joints. The builders assembled the towering marble and limestone blocks using a revolutionary technique. They did not rely on simple mortar. Instead, they poured molten lead into the gaps between the stones. As the lead cooled and solidified, it created a bond that was both incredibly strong and surprisingly flexible. This lead cushion acted as a shock absorber, allowing the entire structure to sway slightly during an earthquake without cracking apart. Simultaneously, it formed a perfect waterproof seal, protecting the core of the lighthouse from the salty spray and waves that constantly battered its base. The design was a multi-layered defense. The square base provided a broad, stable platform. Above it rose an octagonal middle section, a shape that offered less resistance to the wind. The circular top, crowned by a giant mirror that reflected sunlight by day and a fire by night, completed the form. Each tier was engineered to dissipate energy differently, a symphony in stone that danced with the elements rather than fighting them. The lighthouse stood for centuries not because it was the strongest structure ever built, but because it was the smartest. It embodied the ancient engineer's holistic philosophy, proving that true resilience comes from understanding and respecting every threat, from the slow creep of decay to the instant of cataclysm. Yet the brilliance of these individual solutions raises a profound question. How did such sophisticated knowledge, born in seemingly isolated corners of the world, manage to travel across continents and centuries? The ancient world was far from a collection of sealed chambers, each inventing resilience in a vacuum. It was a vibrant, interconnected web, a network of innovation where the most vital secrets of survival were the most valuable trade goods of all. The most famous of these highways was the Silk Road, a sprawling artery of commerce that carried more than just silk and spices. Along its dusty trails moved caravans of ideas, with architects and engineers themselves often traveling alongside merchants. A builder from Persia might marvel at the earthquake-resistant wooden joints of a Chinese temple, carrying that visual blueprint back to his own homeland. The design of the Japanese pagoda, with its remarkable central pillar, did not spring fully formed from the islands. Scholars see clear echoes in the multi-storied watchtowers of China's Han Dynasty, structures that also employed complex wooden bracketing to achieve flexibility. The knowledge likely traveled across the sea with Buddhist monks and diplomats, a technological exchange wrapped in a spiritual mission. This was not simple copying, but a process of intelligent adaptation. The Japanese took the concept and refined it into the distinct Shinbashira, a pendulum perfectly suited to their own unique seismic challenges. This diffusion was even more dramatic in the realm of the arch. While the Romans are famed for their monumental aqueducts, the basic principle of the arch, which distributes weight so effectively, was perfected millennia earlier in Mesopotamia. Through trade and conquest, this architectural concept traveled westward, where Roman engineers saw its potential and scaled it to a level the Mesopotamians could never have imagined. They transformed a local innovation into the backbone of a continent-spanning empire. Similarly, the Persians' genius for underground water management, the Qanat, did not remain a secret. As Islamic civilization expanded, it adopted and spread this life-sustaining technology across North Africa and into Spain, where it would nourish arid landscapes for 1,000 years. This constant flow of knowledge meant that a successful strategy for surviving an earthquake in the Andes could, in theory, eventually inspire a technique for building in the Alps. It reveals a timeless truth about human ingenuity. When faced with a shared threat, our greatest advantage has never been isolation but connection. The survival of one became a lesson for all, written not in books but in the very stones of their cities. The same principles that allowed a pagoda to dance with an earthquake are now being coded into the steel skeletons of our tallest skyscrapers. Modern engineers, armed with supercomputers and advanced materials, are arriving at solutions that bear a striking resemblance to the ancient wisdom we have been exploring. In an era defined by climate change and increasingly violent natural disasters, these old lessons are not just historical curiosities, they are urgent blueprints for survival. The most direct parallel lies in seismic engineering. Today's base isolation systems, used in critical structures from hospitals to bridges, are the high-tech descendants of Inca stonework and Minoan timber layers. Instead of interlocking stones, we use alternating layers of steel plates and synthetic rubber pads placed beneath a building's foundation. When the ground shakes, these isolators flex, allowing the entire structure above to slide gently back and forth, absorbing the energy just as the stones of Sacsayhuaman did. The goal is identical: to let the building float on the tremor rather than resist it. Similarly, the massive pendulum inside a Japanese pagoda finds its modern equivalent in the tuned mass dampers of skyscrapers like the Taipei 101. A colossal steel ball weighing hundreds of tons is suspended near the top of the tower. When strong winds or earthquakes cause the building to sway, the ball swings in the opposite direction, counteracting the motion with the same precise physics as the ancient Shinbashira. This is not coincidence, it is convergence, a rediscovery of fundamental truths about managing energy. The dialogue with water is experiencing a similar renaissance. For decades, the modern approach to flooding was to fight it with rigid concrete channels and higher levees, a strategy that often failed catastrophically. Now, a revolutionary concept called the sponge city is gaining traction, particularly in places like China. The idea is to redesign urban landscapes to act like natural ground, absorbing rainwater where it falls through permeable pavements, green roofs, and constructed wetlands. This is a direct echo of the ancient Harappan drainage systems and the Sumerian irrigation networks that managed water by spreading and storing it, rather than simply expelling it. It is a return to the philosophy of cooperation, of viewing water as a resource to be managed within the city, not an enemy to be ejected. Even the Roman pursuit of durable materials is being revisited. Scientists are now actively studying the chemical composition of Roman seawater concrete, hoping to reverse engineer its self-healing properties to create more sustainable modern versions. This shift in thinking is profound. After a century of believing technology could dominate nature, we are relearning the ancient art of negotiation. The next great leap in resilient design may not come from a new invention, but from a deeper understanding of an old one, proving that the most advanced solutions are sometimes the most timeless. Yet for all their profound ingenuity, the Earth sometimes presented a problem too immense, a force too chaotic for even the most brilliant ancient solutions. The battle was never one-sided. We must also confront the moments when the planet's fury simply overwhelmed human foresight, when the best-laid plans vanished beneath a wave of sand or a sinking foundation. These failures are not marks of incompetence. They are vital chapters in the story, stark reminders of nature's ultimate power and the humbling limits of ancient knowledge. Consider the magnificent Roman port of Caesarea Maritima, a jewel of engineering whose very harbor was a testament to the miracle of seawater concrete. For centuries it thrived, a bustling gateway to the Eastern Empire, but the Roman engineers, for all their skill, lacked a crucial understanding of a phenomenon we now call liquefaction. During a powerful earthquake, water-saturated, loose soil can instantly lose its strength, behaving like a liquid. The solid ground beneath the massive harbor structures turned in an instant to quicksand. The ingenious concrete moles and breakwaters, designed to withstand the pounding waves, had no defense against the ground simply giving way beneath them. The port sank, its carefully engineered geometry distorted beyond repair. This was not a failure of the material, but a failure of subsurface knowledge. They had mastered the sea, but the hidden earth beneath it held a secret weakness they could not see. A similar fate met the legendary city of Yuba in the Arabian desert, a place so wealthy it was said to be supported by pillars of ruby and emerald. Yuba's prosperity was built on controlling the frankincense trade routes, but its location was its eventual doom. The city was built over a large limestone cavern. For generations it stood firm, yet the constant drawing of water from wells and the gradual erosion from the rare but powerful desert rains slowly weakened the cavern's roof. The engineers of Yuba could not have known the precise geology lurking below their feet. One day, without warning, the ground gave way, swallowing much of the city into the abyss. The desert sands, always waiting, then swept in to bury the ruins, erasing Yuba from the map until modern archaeology revealed its tragic end. These catastrophes complete the picture. They show that ancient resilience was not about achieving permanent, absolute safety. It was a desperate, brilliant, and often precarious negotiation. Success was measured in generations of survival, in buying precious time against an adversary that never sleeps. The true lesson from these failures is not that their engineering was flawed, but that the Earth's complexities are infinite. It forces a profound question upon us. If civilizations with such a deep connection to their environment could still be blindsided, what unseen vulnerabilities lie beneath our own modern cities, waiting for the right trigger to reveal them? A city that feels safe is a city that can dream. The deepest impact of ancient engineering was not measured in stones that remained standing, but in the collective sigh of relief from the people who lived among them. When a farmer could trust that the canal system would not fail and drown his fields, he could plant for the next season and the one after that. When a family knew their home was built on foundations designed to sway, not shatter, they could sleep through a minor tremor without the paralyzing fear that the world was ending. This psychological security was the ultimate dividend on the immense investment in resilient design. It transformed survival from a daily gamble into a reasonable expectation, and that shift changed everything. Stability bred trust in the governing powers, the priesthood or the king who could demonstrate a tangible connection to the gods, one that resulted in a city that withstood the earth's anger, solidified their legitimacy. The monumental scale of a ziggurat or a pyramid was not just an offering to the heavens. It was a promise made visible to every citizen, a declaration that the social order itself was as enduring as the stone from which it was built. This allowed for an explosion of cultural and artistic expression that went beyond the utilitarian. Artisans could spend a lifetime perfecting a craft, knowing their work would not be erased by the next flood. Scribes could meticulously record laws, histories, and literature, confident that these records would inform future generations. Long-term projects that seem unimaginable in a precarious society became possible. The very act of planning a temple that would take 100 years to complete requires an unshakable belief in continuity. These great structures were more than buildings. They were psychological anchors, massive declarations of defiance against the chaos of the natural world. They reinforced a collective identity, a shared story that said, "We are here and we will endure." This sense of permanence, carefully engineered into the landscape, is perhaps the most precious and overlooked legacy our ancestors left behind. A silent, crumbling wall is never just a pile of stones. For the modern archaeologist, it is a complex data set, a frozen moment of engineering genius waiting to be decoded. The real detective work begins long before the first shovel hits the earth. Today, scientists use tools that would seem like magic to the builders of the past, peering into the ground without breaking the surface. Ground-penetrating radar sends pulses of energy deep into the soil, painting a detailed picture of what lies hidden below. This is how we can now trace the ghostly paths of Persian Khanats, those underground rivers, mapping their entire course from mountain source to desert outlet without digging a single trench. We can locate buried foundations, identify ancient voids, and even detect the subtle differences in soil density that signal a long collapsed canal. It is like giving the landscape an X-ray, revealing the skeleton of a forgotten infrastructure. Above-ground, laser scanning technology called LiDAR is revolutionizing our view of ancient sites. Mounted on airplanes or drones, these scanners fire millions of laser points at a landscape, even one shrouded in thick jungle or dense forest. By measuring the time it takes for each beam to return, they create a breathtakingly precise three-dimensional model of the Earth's surface, stripping away the vegetation to expose the bare topography. This allows engineers to study the exact layout of a city like Machu Picchu or the foundation of a Roman aqueduct. They can then feed this digital model into sophisticated computer simulations to see how these structures behave under seismic stress. They can virtually recreate an earthquake and watch as the polygonal stones of an Inca wall shift and settle exactly as the ancient engineers intended. This is not guesswork anymore. It is a precise analysis of physics that confirms the intentional brilliance behind what might look like random rubble. The secrets are not just in the shapes, but in the very substance. In laboratories around the world, materials scientists are dissecting ancient concretes and plasters with electron microscopes. They are not just identifying ingredients, they are observing the chemical reactions that continue to occur over centuries. By analyzing a tiny sliver of Roman harbor concrete, they can see the unique crystalline structures that formed as seawater interacted with the volcanic ash, understanding at a nanoscale why this material grows stronger with age while our own modern concrete weakens. This is reverse engineering on a molecular level, turning a 2,000-year-old sample into a recipe for the future. This interdisciplinary approach, combining archaeology, engineering, and materials science, is constantly rewriting our understanding. What was once dismissed as primitive or merely decorative is now recognized as highly sophisticated technology. A curious pattern on a stone block might be revealed as a clever lifting point. A strange layer of clay in a foundation is identified as a purposeful waterproofing membrane. Each discovery peels back another layer, showing us that these ancient builders were not just lucky. They were empirical scientists learning through relentless observation and iteration. The ruins are not just monuments, they are active classrooms, and we are only now beginning to understand the language of the lessons they teach. Their legacy is not merely one of survival, but of a profound and sustainable dialogue with the planet. From the swaying wooden pagodas of Japan to the silent, subterranean rivers of Persia, these ancient strategies form a timeless blueprint. Their genius was not in dominating nature with brute force, but in observing its patterns and learning to move with them. They understood that true resilience lies in flexibility, in foresight, and in a deep, respectful partnership with the Earth's immense power. We now stand at a similar crossroads, confronting a climate that grows more volatile with each passing year. Our own toolbox is filled with technological marvels they could never have dreamed of, yet we are often building in defiance of the very rhythms they learned to honor. The lesson carved into their stone and channeled through their water is disarmingly simple. The most advanced engineering is not about control, it is about cooperation. To secure our own future, we must rediscover the ancient art of listening to the world, of designing with its forces, not against them. Their quiet wisdom, tested by millennia, may well be the most vital innovation we have. The silent lessons of these ancient builders now rest with you. If the ingenious dance of a Japanese pagoda or the self-cleaning canals of Dujongyan left you in awe, we would love to hear your thoughts. Which of these engineering marvels impressed you the most? Share your favorite in the comments below. For more journeys into the world's forgotten technologies and historical mysteries, make sure to subscribe to the channel and tap the notification bell so you never miss an exploration. Tell us what other ancient puzzles you would like us to unravel next. Thank you for joining this investigation into humanity's enduring dialogue with the planet. The greatest discoveries from our past so often light the way to our future.